Every great movement, every big idea, it seems to have a foundational text, right? A book that's supposed to define everything. But here's the real question. Once you have that book, how do you actually use it? Today, we're digging into how early Christianity literally invented the tools to wield its most powerful asset, the Bible. I mean, really think about it. Put yourself back in the 3rd century. You're part of this new, up-and-coming faith. You've got this collection of scriptures, this incredibly powerful book that is the core of your identity. So what's next? How do you make it connect with a world that's skeptical, maybe even hostile, or just doesn't get it? And this was the exact puzzle that the early Latin Christian writers were trying to solve. They were in a really tricky spot. You had the highly educated, very suspicious Roman world looking down on them, you had long-established Jewish traditions to contend with, and on top of all that, there were disagreements and even breakaway movements popping up from within their own ranks. A one-size-fits-all approach to scripture just wasn't going to cut it. They needed a whole toolbox.
So let's open up that toolbox and take a look at the first instrument they created. And honestly, it is probably not at all what you'd expect. It's all about being incredibly subtle. Okay, so meet our first guy, a writer named Minucius Felix. Now, he's writing for a very specific crowd, those educated Romans, the ones who are probably rolling their eyes and thinking this whole Christian thing is a bit ridiculous. He's got to find a way to get their attention, to earn their intellectual respect.
So, to try and persuade them, how many direct quotes from the Bible do you think he uses in his major work, the Octavius? The answer is 0. A big, fat 0. Not a single one. See, instead of hitting them over the head with chapter and verse, he used something a scholar called scriptural impregnation. He basically wove the ideas, the themes, and the rhythm of the Bible into his sophisticated philosophical argument. It was so slick, it was designed to be persuasive without ever feeling preachy. Think influence, not instruction.
But that subtle approach, that was just one tool in the box. The next person we're going to look at took a completely different and way more aggressive path. If Minucius Felix used a delicate file, this next writer brought in the entire set of power tools. And that writer's name is Tertullian. The source material paints this picture of an absolute intellectual giant, full of inexhaustible vigor, burning rhetoric, and biting satire. I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? He was a fighter. He wasn't playing around with subtlety, he was there to win. And this is where you can see his strategic brilliance in action. Just look at this breakdown. Tertullian's use of scripture changed completely depending on who he was talking to. When he's writing to Roman governors, the outsiders you see on the left, he argues using their language, Roman law, Roman philosophy. And the number of Bible quotes? 0, just like Minucius Felix. But when he turns to his insider audience, whether it's fellow Christians he's teaching or so-called heretics he's debating, it is a completely different ballgame. Scripture suddenly becomes, in his own words, the decisive piece of evidence. Those works are just packed with quotes. He knew exactly which tool to grab for which job every single time. And the result of all this was, frankly, revolutionary. By wielding scripture with such precision and power, Tertullian didn't just win debates. He actually created a new language. His unique style, his vocabulary, it all came together to form what scholars now call Christian Latin, literally shaping the way Western Christianity would talk and write for centuries. But hey, the toolbox was still being built out. The next phase saw writers getting even more creative, moving beyond just prose and arguments and into the world of poetry and prophecy. And this is where Comedian comes in. He was a poet. He looked at the stories and ideas of the Bible and thought, I can turn this into verse. He even used things like acrostic poems to make his points memorable. His whole goal was to capture the imagination, to adapt biblical language into his own poetic style to reach audiences like pagans and Jews. Now, a really crucial technique that Comedian and others used was something called typology. Basically, it's a way of reading the Old Testament and seeing its people and events as foreshadowing, or types, of what was going to happen with Jesus and the church. For instance, the source points out that for Comedian, the biblical figure Leah was a type of the synagogue. It was this really clever way of weaving the two testaments together into one single epic story. So far, we've seen subtle influence, knockout debates, and poetic inspiration. But as the Christian movement got bigger and bigger, a new problem started to creep in: consistency. How do you make sure the person teaching in this city is saying the same thing as the person teaching in the next? This job called for an organizer. and that organizer was Cyprian, the Bishop of Carthage. Now, this guy was a former high-powered public speaker, a rhetorician, and he brought that systematic, organized mind to the problem. He saw that preachers needed a quick, reliable way to find the perfect passage of Scripture for the right teaching moment. And his solution, as you can see here, was just brilliantly methodical. Step 1, he gathered up a massive collection of biblical quotes. Step 2, and this was the genius part, he organized them all by topic, under headings about Jesus or how to live a Christian life. Step 3, he added his own short little comments to help guide how to interpret them. And finally, Step 4, he published the whole thing as a handbook for preachers called Ad Corinam. Now, that might sound pretty simple to us today, but you have to understand, back then, this was a total game changer. It was the very first systematic, topic-based guide to the Bible in the Latin West. It was an incredibly practical tool for a growing movement, making sure that a teacher in one town and a teacher in another had the same playbook. So, let's pull all these threads together. What these 4 very different figures show us is that right from the beginning, there was never just one right way to use a sacred text. They invented a toolbox, and each one of them contributed a unique and vital instrument. Minucius Felix gave them that tool for subtle, quiet influence. Tertullian brought in a multi-tool, perfect for strategic debate against any opponent. Commodian added a poetic hammer, a way to capture the heart and the imagination. And Cyprian gave them the organizer's kit, essential for building a strong, consistent community. And this table just lays it all out for us, clear as day. 4 different writers, 4 different main audiences, and 4 totally distinct methods. From sophisticated dialogue with 0 quotes, all the way to systematic handbooks for insiders. They showed this incredible range and adaptability. They proved that using a sacred text isn't about having one rigid answer, it's about knowing who you're talking to and what you're trying to achieve. When you really boil it down, their big challenge was making an ancient, complicated text feel alive and powerful in a brand new world. And that kind of leaves us with a big question to think about, doesn't it? Whether it's in our culture, our politics, or just our own lives. How do we use the foundational stories and texts that shape us today? Do we persuade? Do we debate? Do we inspire? Or do we organize? Their toolbox is a powerful reminder that the answer is almost never that simple.